Again, and very welcome to the event, Blake's Tyger and the Lion of Dharma. Tonight's session is dedicated to the celebration of Blake's legacy music, which goes far beyond the hymn Jerusalem. When we think of Blake, we naturally associate him with poetry and painting, but it's about time to start thinking of him as a musician too. According to Blake himself, poetry, painting, and music are the three powers in man as conversing with paradise, which the flood didn't sweep away. And we are told by his wife that Blake was constantly conversing with paradise. His biographies contain some interesting anecdotes about Blake singing his own poems in literary salons and even on his deathbed. And according to his contemporaries, he had an amazing voice and could sing very well. So I wonder, were Blake a man from the 60s and 70s? Would he sing in a rock band? Would he be a singer-songwriter, more or less like Bob Dylan and Nick Drake? And talking about the 60s, at around 68, a quite notorious guy who happened to be a poet too, decided to set Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience to music. His name is Allen Ginsberg. And tonight, we are very honored to welcome Stephen Taylor, who played and sang Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience to music. And Stephen holds a PhD in music from Brown University. He's also former chairman of Jack Kerouac's School of Disembodied Poetics at Europa University. His most recent works include the book Don't Hide the Madness, William Burroughs in Conversation with Allen Ginsberg, published in 2018, and also the album William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, released in 2019. On the top of that, he's a member of the seminal rock band The Fugs since 1985. For the record, The Fugs was the earliest rock group to set Blake to music back in 1965, even before Ginsberg. So welcome, Steve. And I want to begin this conversation by asking you how you first met Allen Ginsberg and how you started your collaboration with him.
Well, thank you, Camilla. It's very lovely to be here. It's an honor to be speaking to the Blake Society and friends. And so I met Ginsberg in 1976 in spring when I was in college, and he came to my school, and he had been in the habit of wherever he went, he would find a student who could play the guitar to sit with him because he'd been writing songs. He'd set Blake in 68, beginning in 68. I met him in 76. And so he would begin his readings with a song. Then there would be songs interspersed in between the readings. And then he would finish with usually with Blake's Nurse's song from Innocence. And so I was introduced to him as a kid who could play the guitar. And he had this.
This one, exactly this one, it was the one that he used.
Well, there were several, and of the several that he owned, this was the biggest and the heaviest. So he didn't travel with this one much, which is why it's in good condition. But it was like this. It has these little pieces of tape with F, A written on it. So he had been playing songs and picking up guitar players. And so I sat in, and I knew Blake, sort of as one does, I guess. And he started to play, I think he did Spring first. He started to play Spring. And I was able to watch his right hand on the keyboard and learn the chords. And so I was playing along, and I started to sing, and he'd never had anybody do that before. He had sung his own songs with his own accompaniment with various people accompanying him, but other than Peter, his boyfriend, he never had anybody sing, and he never had anybody put a high harmony on top of what he was doing. And so that was it. He said, "Don't leave," So and that was it. 20 years later, we were still doing it.
And do you remember which was the first Blake setting that you listened to when he was there at your university?
Yeah, it would have been probably opened up with Spring. I remember singing Spring, and I remember singing The Lamb, And I remember singing the nurse's song.
Amazing. Yeah. But apparently Ginsberg recorded most of the Songs of Innocence and Experience some 7 years before you joined him. So have you ever been to the studio with Ginsberg to record any of his Blake settings? Or have you ever witnessed him setting Blake to music?
No, because by the time I came along, he'd already done everything he was going to do. I mean, he set 19 songs from Innocence, and he set something like, let's see, 1 to 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 or so songs from Experience, but there were 26 songs in Experience. So he actually asked me to finish them. He wanted me to finish the set of Experience. And I did some of them, but I still haven't finished them.
Yeah, so there was a kind of mission, right? He called you apparently when he was dying.
Yeah,
Is that right?
Yes, when Allen found out that he was not going to live very much longer, he telephoned all his friends to say he was dying. his final instructions to me was finish the Blake.
Yeah, and Alan, apparently he had his own theories about how to set poetry to music. And apparently he was particularly influenced by the likes of William Carlos Williams, Basil Bunting, Zukovsky, and Ezra Pound. Did you have conversations with him about that, about the process of setting Blake to music?
Yes, in the sense that he felt.
Stephen.
Yes.
Really sorry to intervene. We're getting a lot of stuff in the chat. They're finding it a little hard to hear you. If you could just move in on the mic or turn the mic up. I think it's, that'll be good. And if you could turn it up at all. I think it's fine when you play and it just needs to be a little louder.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
So he had these sort of old-fashioned ideas about setting verse to music. For example, when the poem refers to the sun rising, then the melody should go up. Look on the rising sun, there God does live. You know, those are very old-fashioned ideas that he had about music, but it helped him shape the melody, and also very much attached to what he thought of as the natural sound of the speech or the natural inflection of the spoken voice. He would speak sometimes to demonstrate this theory, right? How do you set tune to spoken word?
Yeah, but then apparently, because I read something that he used a tape recorder for when he was composing, when he was setting Blake to music. But then you've got something else, that he could write some sort of rudimentary music, right?
Yeah.
Apparently we have some pictures of it. So
yeah, he could notate pitch, but he didn't know how to notate rhythm. So the lead sheets that he wrote, the original sheets that he wrote with his hand doing the lyrics, had penciled in dots, but the rhythmic notation wasn't indicated. But he was pretty sure of his melodies, and he was very consistent in the way he delivered them, as far as I could tell.
Yeah. So, and apparently one of the main reasons that led Ginsberg to set Blake to music had to do with an experience, or what he calls an auditory hallucination, of hearing Blake reciting or singing to him some poems from his Songs of Innocence and Experience, right? So can you tell us a bit about this fascinating story about him hearing Blake?
Yeah, you can check it in the biographies. The biographers have treated it. I can tell you what he told me. He was sort of at loose ends. He'd been suspended from Columbia University for about a year, I guess, and he'd gone back, and he had a few courses to finish up. And it was the summer of 1948. He was living in Harlem in a borrowed apartment. And the apartment belonged to a theology student. So there was lots of St. John of the Cross and, St. Augustine, all of the theology texts and philosophy texts were in there, along with Blake. And so he was reading Blake a lot and going over and over the Sunflower. And at a certain point, he's lying and he had sort of become isolated. His friends were traveling, the big household of Joan Vollmer where they all lived for a time had sort of broken apart, and people were traveling. And he didn't see his friends very often. He didn't have a telephone. And so he was sort of isolated. And one day, lying on his bed, looking out the window, he's looking at the rooftops of Harlem. And what he told me was that, these buildings are perhaps 100 years old. And there are stone carved decorations on the tops of the buildings that were carved by Italian immigrant stone carvers. And he suddenly had the idea that the presence of the artwork or the presence of the carving on the building manifested the presence of the artist. So that the piece of art is a kind of time machine, and that the artists, the men that did this carving 100 years ago were really there, still there in a sense, or the time machine, he used that word with me, the time machine of the artwork manifested the presence of the artist. And then he heard Blake and realized that Blake is present. And one of the commentators says that he heard the sunflower and realized that he was the sunflower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and apparently he said in his later years that he finally realized that maybe it was his own voice. Is that correct? Did he mention it to you, or
I don't know. He always said he thought he'd heard the voice of William Blake. But
yeah.
There's also the history. I mean, it's also, his mother had serious mental difficulties and eventually died in a mental institution. And he was afraid that that his hallucinations indicated that he might have the same problems that his mother had. So there was some fear there that the hallucination was evidence of mental illness also. And he did wind up in a mental institution a year later for other reasons.
Yeah, for some 8 months, right?
Yeah.
But do you think that when he set Blake to music, he wanted to retrieve any sort of original melody? Because there are lots of many biographical accounts about Blake singing his poems. But do you think that he wanted to imitate 18th and 19th century music, or or do you think he was mostly influenced by the music of his time?
I think both. I think he believed that he was interested in what Blake's musical ideas might have been. So he said, he often talked about Wesleyan hymns and things like that. Methodist hymns that were current in London at the time, the tunes of which might have influenced Blake. But also, like Blake, he was a kind of man about town who absorbed a lot of music. And, he had a pretty good, didn't have a large record collection, but it was fairly eclectic. He was a fan of the blues. He had Harry Smith's Anthology of American Folk Music from the 1950s, which is all recordings made between World War I and the Great Depression. The last generation of American artists, folk artists who learned their music from their aunties rather than from the radio, And so he had all of that, and he listened to Leadbelly. He was a big fan of Leadbelly. He listened to a lot of jazz. So he had a really good musical ear. I thought he was a pretty good singer. I mean, I can remember we were meeting with Marianne Faithfull about something, and she said, "Oh, Alan, don't sing," But I thought he was pretty good. He was in tune. If you put a harmony on him, it didn't bother him. He dug it. And he came from a line of cantors. I mean, his ancestors were singers within that tradition of the Jewish religion. So yeah, I think a lot of people think they're channeling Blake. You meet a lot of artists who seem to think that they have some kind of insight on Blake. It's because Blake is he's in the ether, He's a hugely influential artist.
Yeah, I remember you telling me a story about Van Morrison. Can you tell the story to?
Yeah, we were at Covent Garden Market, I think. There was some gig outdoors. Somebody had arranged for us to play on the street corner. And so we played a few tunes, and this lady came up and she said, Van's hiding around the corner. He wants to speak to you. And
The
so,
Morrison.
Van Morrison. So then we went with them back to their place. And the only thing that Morrison wanted to talk about was Blake. I mean, I don't blame him. He had an interest in Blake. And here was a guy who was singing Blake. And probably this was going to be the only opportunity to pick his brains. So he just wanted to talk about Blake, and that's what they talked about.
Yeah. And it as you're also a member of the Thugs, right? And apparently Ed Sanders, as far as I'm concerned, was the first person, the first composer, non-classical composer to set Blake to music. And I would like you to compare Ed Sanders' settings of Blake and Ginsberg. Do you think that what's the basic difference between those two? Because Sanders set Blake to music at around 1965, and Ginsberg did that at around 68. He started with the Green Monk, and then he started setting Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. And what can you tell about the difference between, you know, the different approaches of them?
Sunflower, weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden clime, where the traveler's journey is done, where the youth. That's Allen, and Ed isn't. Sanders is in a minor key. Sunflower, weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden rhyme. They're different.
But in what way? So how could you explain the difference musically? What do you think that Sanders is more daring, more revolutionary in that sense than Ginsberg? Because I remember you mentioned something like that Ginsberg was trying to follow the speech, whereas Sanders just had the melody in his mind and he followed it.
Yes, sometimes Ed would accent a syllable or bend a syllable in a way that was unexpected. Allen was very much based in spoken word, but also Allen was coming from chanting mantras. I mean, one of the British critics, I think, said when the record came out that the settings were mantra-like, and Allen's Sunflower is all on one chord, pretty much, and like a chant, and Ed's much more complicated chord progression. Yeah,
and I want you to tell us more about the dynamic of touring with Ginsberg and Peter Orlovsky, his partner. So how was touring with them across the US and Europe? How was the experience of playing with them, of hanging out with them?
Well, Allen mostly worked alone in the US. Unless he was in the New York area. If he was in the New York area, I would play with him. And we did go out sometimes, but we never did long tours together in the US because it was too expensive. Playing small shows in colleges and clubs and so forth was how he made his living. He didn't make very much money from books, at least not until he got the real book deal, starting in the 80s, thanks to Barry Miles and Andrew Wiley. But so he would go out to make money. He would go by himself with his harmonium and teach a class and then do a reading. And sometimes I went with him, but the big tours were all in Europe. And we would try, it was a good arrangement. So Allen was the star. I was the accompanist and the secretary, making the phone calls. And Peter handled the luggage. And then on stage, we were a trio. And Peter played the banjo and the guitar, Allen played the harmonium, I had a couple of guitars, and we would sing songs together. The routine would be invitations would come in from all over the world, really, to perform. And he would collect them. Allen's secretary, Bob Rosenthal, would collect them into a file folder. And when a file folder reached a certain mass, then they would lay it all out and string it together. And so what would happen is that we were usually based in Amsterdam. Ben Posset was a great promoter of poetry events. He had an organization called One World Poetry in Amsterdam. And so Ben would provide airline tickets, round trip tickets for 3 people to and from Amsterdam. So then once we were in Amsterdam, someone, say in Germany, who had a lesser of a budget but wanted us to come, all they needed to do was provide a train ticket, a hotel room, and a fee. So we would land in Amsterdam, play the Cosmos and the Milky Way, the Paradiso, and then go out by train all over Europe. And it was just wonderful, wonderful. Peter handled the luggage, I handled the secretarial chores, and Allen was a star. And we would go out sometimes for 3 months at a time. It was wonderful. But it was,
Stephen, we've lost Camilla again. She's dropped out. But I wondered if you'd like to show the pictures of
Sure.
the tours. Well, Ian can put them up for you if you like. Here we go.
So that would be, that's probably in the US. That's probably late 80s, early 90s, I would say. I would say late 80s. So that's the most recent photograph of the group. And that's the typical arrangement. He wanted a piano bench, some flowers, a proper chair, a chair that wouldn't force you to sit back. It had to be a proper chair, like a dining chair, some solid chair. There had to be a little carpet. There had to be a PA system and music stands. And the light had to be sufficient that he could read. So that there was a contract writer that said, these are the things that we need. And that's how we did it. We played like that for 20 years.
Oh, so it's quite a ritual setup, really.
Yeah, flowers and he would light incense, and he had, hang on. Ganesh, patron god of poets, was on the tablecloth. And he would use that to dress. He would use that to dress the table often. And he had his finger symbols that he'd gotten in India that he used. To bring the audience to attention at the beginning. And like I said, it would always start out with music, interspersed with music, and finish with music. And also he wrote a lot of his own songs. He was very prolific, and I really liked his songs. I mean, Bob Dylan had taught him how to make a song using 3 chords. So at the beginning with the Blake settings, he was coming off of doing mantras, and he was coming back from India. And so everything was one note, little lamb, little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? He gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. It was one chord, but over time he developed a little bit more sophistication harmonically, and I believe that started when Dylan clued him that if you have 3 chords, you can write a song, which is, of course, this is something that everybody knows who's a sort of folk guitarist or a punk rock guitarist. There was that famous punk rock magazine out of London that said, here's a chord, here's a chord, here's a chord, now start a band. The idea that with three chords, you could have a whole repertoire. So he wrote a book of songs called Rags, Ballads and Harmonium Songs, which are very funny, actually. Those really hooked me. I mean, the Blake was good. That was great to connect over that at first. But the songs really hooked me. They were so clever and funny. I really enjoyed doing those.
Does that raise the thing, Stephen, of the whole thing of music coming from the heart and from your investment in it, as opposed to just sheer technical ability, which is sometimes soulless, isn't it?
Yes. Well, he had a whole theory about that, which was that there were different voices. I mean, if you take classical voice lessons, there's a head voice, the chest voice, and the voice that's coming from the diaphragm, right? But for Allen, it was heart voice, for it to come from the heart. And in fact, within the Tibetan cosmology, or within the Tibetan system of mantras that he learned from Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the mantra ah, the syllable ah, is associated with the heart. So very often he would begin a reading by having everybody in the audience singing ah. He would issue instructions about how to do it on the long breath and so on. So yeah, he was very much thinking of the music coming from the body, that's for sure.
That's fantastic. I think Camilla's come back to us now, Stephen.
Oh, great.
So I should be much better company than I am. Welcome back, Camilla. We are having a few problems.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I'm having some internet problems now, but hopefully it's settled now. It's sorted. So so another question then, Steve. You also feel personally very connected to Blake. So I would like to know how was your own, or how is your own relationship with Blake? So how it started for you?
So it's hard to, I have to guess that, you know, I probably sound American, but I was born in England. And I had my first 10 years of schooling, or 8 years or so of schooling in Manchester, in a Church of England school attached to St. James's Church. So we used to sing every morning. The headmistress, Miss Proudlove, would lead us in song. It was fabulous. And so that was, I really learned to sing in mornings in school, singing hymns. And I think we must have had Jerusalem at some point. And I think Jerusalem must have been the first thing that made an impression, in that wonderful setting by Hubert Parry.
Yeah. So
we had that. But he was always sort of in the air. He always sort of a presence. And I learned much later that I had a family member who liked to read Blake. During the war, my father and his younger brother were sent out of Manchester on the evacuation of the children to the country to avoid the bombing. And then he was sent to live with a couple in Staffordshire. And Walter, whom I came to know as Uncle Walter later on, had a little book of Blake. And when he died, it came to me, which seemed just marvelous. I guess the family realized I was into Blake, and so they sent me Uncle Walter's that little Blake book. This one here. So that was a sort of affirmation from a relative who had been very, very important to me as a child. Because after the war, I came along 10 years after the war, but by that point, Auntie Jean and Uncle Walter were elderly, and we used to spend our Christmases with them. And they were what I knew for grandparents. They were sort of my foster grandparents. So he was a Blakean coal miner.
Amazing.
So that's the, that's the reach of William Blake, right? The coal miner, a Staffordshire coal miner, would have a little book of Blake on his bedside table. It's charming.
So that's how you had your first contact with Blake. So by the time you met Ginsberg,
I knew Blake. By the time I met Ginsberg, I knew Blake because I don't know why. The beginning is Jerusalem, and then you see the lyrics, which are charming and exquisite. And so by the time when I stepped on stage with Allen, we had barely spoken. He said, "Can you play the guitar?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, come back in half an hour." And so suddenly I was on stage. That was the extent of our conversation. And suddenly I was on stage, and he started to sing Blake's Spring. And that wasn't difficult. It wasn't difficult to join in. And then, so, of course, being with Allen and witnessing his teaching also, because most summers when he went to Naropa University, or then Naropa Institute, he would teach Blake every summer, and I would sit in on those classes either as an assistant or the recordist who was doing the audio recording of the class for the archive. And so I really got the Blake transmission from Ginsberg. I mean, really heavy duty.
Yeah, and there is something curious about Ginsberg's album on Blake. Although it was commercially unsuccessful, he became a reference of Blake's settings for many musicians. So how could you explain that? How do you think that that Ginsberg's album became so influential for other people who set Blake to music later on?
I can only imagine that, you know, the words are so beautiful. And the idea that this guy is singing them, and this is coming along at the same time, a little bit late for the folk revival, but it's coming along at the time when it is possible to be a rock and roll star and not have a pretty voice. So the ordinary voice had become a thing by that point, because the folk music revival had happened in, you know, the 50s and 60s, and blues, and the sort of sweet voice of the crooner, which had dominated popular music out of the 40s and into the 50s, suddenly didn't matter anymore. It was not, you know, didn't have a monopoly. And so I think people listening, I think young musicians coming up, wanting to learn how to write songs and wanting to sing it, hearing that record must have been inspiring. It must have been a kind of permission.
Yeah, yeah, and well, and why have you decided to record Ginsberg songs again? Because you released this album in 2019, and some of the songs, most of the songs are Ginsberg songs, but you try to you try to do exactly what Ginsberg wanted you to do. So, but why have you decided to record Ginsberg songs again?
Well, I promised him 26 years ago now. I promised him when he called me that I would do it. I said, I will finish the Blake. We'd been discussing it for some time. I'll finish the Blake. He wanted me to finish the Blake and record the whole set, finish the dozen or so songs of experience that he had not set, and finish it. But he also wanted me to do it because he had a little bit, the record is very good. It's very well made. It's well produced. Miles did a brilliant job. The players are wonderful. But Allen was a little bit, regretted a little bit that Peter had sung on every song. Peter sang with him in unison on every song. His partner, Peter Orlovsky, matched him syllable for syllable and did a good job of it. But Allen he didn't want that sound. He wanted, finally, in later years, I think he just wanted a simple solo voice to do it, and he wanted me to do it. So I promised him I would.
Yeah, and how many settings you made for the album?
Of mine?
Yeah.
Well, I did ones that he hadn't done. So I did London, but I did Tuli Kupferberg from the Fog setting of London. I did To Tirza. I did The Voice of the Ancient Bard. I did The Little Girl Lost, or Little Girl Lost from Experience. And what else did I do? The second song from Experience, which is Earth's Answer. And I did the Angel. Yeah,
and apparently that's your favorite, right? The Angel.
Yeah, I really like that one. It's such a beautiful story. And also he plays the role. He does like a gender switch. You know, in his dream he's a maiden queen courted by a male angel, right? And the difficulty of that, how she's afraid and she doesn't want to get too close and so on and so forth. And in just like a minute and a half song, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I want to hear from you what you think about the fact that Blake used to sing his poems. Do you think that it's really it's possible to retrieve or to emulate the original melody of his songs? And do you believe that he really sang his songs?
Yes, I believe he really sang his songs. I think the idea that Blake wouldn't be singing is like English professor problem. You know, I mean, I have had colleagues who are surprised to hear, who have English degrees, who were so, oh, he sang, I didn't know that, because we become so attached to the book. But that's a recent thing, that the book is it, and he called it songs, but he didn't mean that, Of course he sang them. And of course, as you know, and as all the Blakeans present know, I'm sure, J.T. Smith put in his memoir that Blake sang, everybody liked it. Some music professors present at the salon noted the melodies. those were never recovered. I think you yourself have been trying to pursue that, and also in the Island in the Moon. So about the time he was visiting the Matthews Salon, 84, 85, I guess, he started to write a kind of parody little play, like a little dramatic scene where the various ladies and gentlemen of the salon sing. And the lyrics that they sing at the salon that he attributes to the various ladies and to Mr. Obtuse Angle, who is him, they're all lyrics that later showed up in 1789 in Songs of Innocence. So it's pretty clear that he sang. The idea that he didn't, I find it very American, actually, to think that somebody didn't sing. He's English, for God's sake. Everybody sings. We sang in pubs. We sang in the living rooms. I mean, every time my family got together, all the elders, within about an hour, it all burst into song, and that was the rest of the evening. You know, it's just a natural thing. It's a natural thing. The idea that Blake would not have sung just is such a strange idea to me.
Amazing. Yeah. I also believe that he sang his songs. After all, they're songs. So well, I would like to ask you to play some Songs of Innocence and Experience, at least one by Ginsberg and maybe one by yourself.
Okay, thank you. I will. I'll give it a try. A bit rusty. I've been locked up for 2 years. Let's see. Let's do Sunflower. Sunflower. So this is one he would have done early on. As you noted, just a little background. In 1968, he went to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, which basically turned into a police riot. And he witnessed the police beating up everybody, completely out of control, and he was horrified. And after the convention, he went to San Francisco to visit Caroline Cassidy, and then he took the Greyhound bus, which is a long ride. The United States, a bus ride across the United States is a long ride. And so he's on the Greyhound bus going back to New York, and he heard the Gray Monk in his ear. He heard a little voice singing the Gray Monk. And so he told me that when he got back to Cherry Valley, he had bought a farm, a small farmhouse, no electricity, no telephone, very, very sort of primitive old farm upstate New York that he got as a kind of refuge. And he went there and he told me he sat up 36 hours setting Blake. So I think a lot of what Miles eventually recorded in '69 on that record is stuff that he had worked on at Cherry Valley at the farm, one after the other, sitting at the pump organ. So the Sunflower would have been one of the first, I think, that he set. And he sings it twice. I'll sing it twice. I'll try to do it in the way that he did it.
Perfect.
Sunflower, weary of time, countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden climb, where the traveler's journey is done, where the youth find a way with desire, and the pale virgin shrouded in snow arise from their graves and aspire where my sunflower wishes to go. Sunflower, weary of time, countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden climb, where the traveler's journey is done, where the youth find a way with desire, and the pale virgin shrouded in snow arise from their graves and aspire, where my sunflower wishes to go. That sound all right?
Yeah, it's amazing. And that, so this one was by Ginsberg himself, right? And I would love to hear another one, but this time set by you.
Okay, I'll do the angel from experience. I'll try. I'm a bit rusty. Let me see if I can get a bit closer to the microphone. I dreamt a dream. What can it mean? And that I was a maiden queen, guarded by an angel mild. Witless world was ne'er begun. And I wept both night, and I wept both night and day. And he wiped my tears away. And and I wept both day and night. I kept from him my heart's delight. And so he took his wings and fled. Then the morn blushed rosy red. I dried my tears and armed my fears with 10,000 shields and spears. Soon my angel came again. I was armed, he came in vain. For the time of youth was fled, and gray hairs were on my head. Well, something like that.
Amazing.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It was really, really amazing. So the last question, and then I will open to the participants of the event. So have you finally finished the mission? Have you accomplished the mission of setting the 55, all the 55? It's not like you had to set the 55, but the ones that he didn't.
Yeah, so there's 26. So let's see, if I did 4 or 5, if I did 5 or 6 of them and Alan did, I only have a few left, but they're not easy. It's time. I will do it, but it's a matter of time.
Yeah, so then you have to release another album then.
Yes,
too.
good inspiration. I will do that. I'll finish the set and I'll send it to you.
Okay, and do you know how many are still to be set to music?
Hang on. So the little girl lost and the little girl found. I've done the chimney sweep. Sick Rose, he did the fly. I did the angel. He did the tiger. He did my pretty rose tree. He did our sunflower. The lily I need to do. I need to do the little vagabond. I need to do poison tree. A little boy lost. I think those are the ones that are remaining to do.
Okay, and you will do it
Yeah,
at some point.
yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so thank you very much, Stephen. And now I will open to the other participants, and I just ask you to use the raise hand function to ask questions. And you can also ask questions using the chat. Okay. So I will see here. I will check the chat. So
I see Luke coming up.
comments. So just comments here. People say that it was wonderful, that they were really happy. And there is a raised hand here, which is Luke Walker. So you can ask your question.
Thanks, Camilla. Hi, Steve, and hi, Camilla. I just want to start by saying thank you so much for setting this up, Camilla and Steve. And such a, so great to see you and to hear you. So I've got so many potential questions I could ask you. I'm writing a book on Ginsberg and Blake at the moment. So, and I've got your, I just want to, you didn't plug it, but I've got your edited book here with the wonderful Robert Crumb cover, and as well as your album and Ginsberg's complete, well, so-called, it's not complete, of course, but complete Songs of Innocence and Experience. And I will come to a question, but I just want to say, I mean, it was really interesting what you said, and I very much agree with what you said about, in a way, Peter Orlovsky singing with Ginsberg on that original 1970 album, recorded in '69, had its sort of limitations, or I think some of the people have an impression perhaps of that original Ginsberg Blake album. There's a few songs where the addition of Orlovsky's voice doesn't, is not harmonious, I would say. There are others where it is, and I would really just encourage people who haven't heard the recent, the 2017 re-released expanded version of Ginsberg's original album, which has all these additional settings that he recorded in '71, to listen to that, because you can really, I know this was before you met Ginsberg, but Stephen, but I'm sure you can agree, you can really hear the difference between those '69 recordings that were on the the album that was released in 1970, and then the additional recordings that he made in '71, by which time his voice had changed, his style had changed. He wasn't singing with Peter Orlovsky, and those songs for me are just, they're amazing, they're magical. And so I just would encourage people, if you think you have a kind of impression of what Ginsberg's original Blake album sounded like, listen to the recent sort of revised expanded version, which has some additional songs he he recorded in 71. I wondered, you so I know you've still got a few more songs to set, Stephen, but I wondered whether whether, and obviously, as you said, Ginsberg started off by setting The Grey Monk, and then he kind of set himself this project of recording the Songs of Innocence and of Experience. But there's a poem, a sort of to-do list poem that he composed in 73, where there's a line in that where he, it's called What I'd Like to Do, the poem. It's just a sort of literally really a to-do list, all different types of things that he's got to do. And there's a line in that where he says that he wants to finish, compose last choirs of Innocence and Experience, set music to tongues of the Rossetti manuscript, orchestrate Jerusalem's quatrains. And I wonder whether do you know whether he ever attempted to do his own setting of Jerusalem, by which he means the preface to Milton, of course. Do you know whether he ever even attempted that, or?
No, I never saw that.
Yeah. And whether you would be, whether you'd be interested in taking on that challenge. It's hard, it's hard. It would be hard to get beyond the Parry setting that's kind of there in the popular consciousness, isn't it?
It's a good tune. It's beautiful. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There is another question here in the chat. So, as an English literature teacher, which texts would you encourage my lovely students read for wider reading contextual support for their essays? I'd appreciate any recommendations. So, which Blake's poems would you recommend for that purpose?
Is the question commentary? Which commentary on Blake, or is it which of Blake's poems?
Blake's poems. Yeah.
I would read the ones that, just off the top of my head, I would read the ones that where the same subject is treated in Innocence and Experience. So Holy Thursday, for example, is a great example because it's two versions of London singing. And in Innocence, he says they are the flower of London town, they're beautifully scrubbed white linen. If all the last line of the poem is, so if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. It's this naive vision that you tell the children that God will look after you. Even if your conditions are horrible, don't worry. Everything will work out and you'll be taken care of. And then in the chimney sweep from Experience, he curses the parents and God. And he says, where are thy father and mother? Say, they have got up to the church to pray. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury and have gone to praise God and his church and his king who make up a heaven of our misery. The priest, the God and the king who make up their heaven of my misery. So it's that contrast. So find all of the ones that there's an instance in Innocence and in an instance in Experience. That would be wonderful for teaching.
Yeah, and there is also the same person, Caroline, also asks about commentary on Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, apparently. So would you recommend any book on interpretation and analysis of the poem that you particularly enjoyed or had access to?
I'm not a Blake scholar. I mean, I'm just a guitar player, But my favorite really is E.P. Thompson's book, which is great for context on Blake. I don't know what the mainline Blake scholars think of it. I think it's just wonderful because it brings in all of the strange little churches. He says London was a beehive of kind of strange churches and prophets, self-appointed prophets, like strange little churches that were very secretive, and how much was Blake influenced by this? Was he a Muggletonian and all that? I love that. I love Thompson's take on Blake. So I would recommend that. Otherwise, I mean, there's tons of stuff. I don't know, I haven't read it all, but I've read a bunch of it. But the E.P. Thompson, Witness Against the Beast, it's a wonderful book. I have Alan's copy, actually. I borrowed it and I never read it.
You never returned.
Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. So we've got now a raised hand from Jason.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Camilla, thank you for organising this. And Stephen, thank you for an absolutely fantastic talk, and the performances as well. The Angel, I just love your setting of the Angel. It's brilliant. My question, which I wasn't, I've done a lot bits of work on the Fugs and Ginsberg, etc. So I was expecting to ask a question about that. But the question I really want to ask is, whereabouts in Staffordshire? And there's a very specific reason. So whereabouts were your adopted? Shield. Okay, great. I asked because I'm the grandson of a miner from Cannock, so South Staffs, who became obsessed with Blake. And I kind of suddenly realised that there probably were quite a lot of miners in various libraries, etc., who were really into Blake.
The name was Emery.
Right.
And that's a very Staffordshire name. I looked it up.
It is indeed,
All
yes.
the Emerys are in Staffordshire.
Yeah. So at some point, I'd love you to just check if there's a library place or anything in the book, if it gives an indication of which library it came from. Because when I was at university, the library the coal mine I grew up across the road from, the library had actually been donated to the University of Birmingham. So you find this incredible, wow. Lots of it's the works of Karl Marx and stuff like that. But yeah, wow. William Blake kind of have a suspicion that he was very much taken up. So it was my question was bizarrely specific in a way that I wasn't. But I also wanted to just say thank you very much.
Thank you. You must know about the blind horses' ghosts in the mines. Do you know about that?
I do. I've heard stories about that. Yes. I mean, my grandfather had a whole range of stories about what found the
same stories. Yeah. Amazing.
Yes. But yeah, yes. I just wanted. I won't take on very much. It was absolutely fantastic. And Aaron, is it wrong for me to pitch? If you want a good reading of Songs of Innocence experience, then Divine Images by Jason Whittaker has a whole section that things and the poems, and particularly Holy Thursday as well, which we're discussing. Okay, but thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got another question from Franca Belarsi.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Luke. Good evening, Jason. And Stephen, you probably don't remember me at all, but I remember you very well because I actually, attended Alan's classes for a week back in July '95, and you were there. Actually, I remember you were there. You participated in the talks, the round tables. So I have two questions for you, which are perhaps more personal questions. First of all, generally speaking, if Blake had not entered your life, in one way or another, how would your life have been different? So what is, another way of, asking the question is, okay, what difference did Blake make to your life, to you as a person and the way you evolved? That would be my first question. And then I have a second question regarding Ginsberg, but perhaps, get round to that first question first, if you agree to answer it, of course.
Okay, so he's one element. He's one of those phenomena that sort of tie many things together. So childhood in the church, the kind of going to a very, very, very old church as a child with the huge books and amazing stained glass, and that whole sort of Church of England culture and the school and singing hymns and learning music in that school and learning to sing hymns and all of that, that becomes a kind of Blakean thing later on. It's one of those elements. Blake is a kind of a constellation. He's like a constellation. So there's the English church, Protestant churches. There's the poetry. There's the idea of the romantic poetry. There's the idea of there's sort of a romantic dichotomy between the innocence of the child and the wise state of the fallen adult and all that. All of those things go through Blake for me. So he's kind of at the middle of a constellation. There are a number of characters like this because any number of artists I could name, but Blake is particularly important because my elders understood him. Because I didn't, my people didn't go to university, so it's kind of, he cuts across the whole spectrum of English life, I think. Right? So many things are familiar, sheep, right? All of it, the lambs, being up, being with the church lads brigade up in the Pennines or something, it's very Blakean, the whole thing. England to me really, and also I have tremendous nostalgia for England because I grew up there and I was not happy as a child in America. So that Blake ties into that too. It's like going home. It's like going home.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is actually, in relation to Ginsberg himself, because of course, poetry and music are related, but nevertheless, Ginsberg was, first and foremost, a man of the spoken word. And you are first and foremost a musician. So again, what difference did Ginsberg make to you as a musician? Did, something for you as a musician change as a result of your contact and your exchanges with Ginsberg over the many years?
Well, he changed everything. I could
Could
say
you
so
be more
much.
specific?
Well, as a musician, here's one small thing. When I first started playing with him, I invited one of my music teachers from university to come to listen. He was a composer called Guy Klusevic. And he came to the show and he watched me playing with Allen. And afterwards he said to me, don't try to force regular meter on him. Follow his time. That was a great teaching. That was a great teaching. Because I got pretty good at matching him. In fact, when I met Ed Sanders and Ed's first saw me playing with Allen, he came backstage and he said, he congratulated me on riding the bucking zebra of Ginsberg's diction. In other words, being able to match his pronunciation. And that got me into the Fugs, actually, the ability to sing. When I was hired by the Fugs as a singer, when Ed first hired me for the band, he thought he was going to have to hire another guitar player. So, but Allen changed everything. Allen changed everything. I would not have met my wife if it wasn't for Allen. Everything changed. I was very unhappy. I was going to teachers college. I thought I was going to be a teacher and I was not happy. And then I met Allen and I started playing gigs and I started arranging music for him, and that turned into arranging music for other artists. And everything changed. Everything changed. He saved me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Franca. So do we have any more questions? Any other raised hand? Apparently not. So, okay. Well, there is a comment here. I'm prepared to allow that Ginsberg's hallucination may have been a neural divination similar to Blake's astral visions. Shortly after his death, I had a dream in which I heard Harold Pinter's voice, and I woke up with a start and have never forgotten it. We only use about 1/10 of the potential of our brains, and there may be super sense possible channels facilitating such communications, which scientists may one day understand. Thank you very much for a really fascinating talk. So yes, so those are the comments. So if we don't have any further questions.
Something, Tristan said something.
Oh, another one, Carrie Davies. For Stephen A. Jason, Joseph Kesey, Northumbria coal miner poet, one of many known as the Pitman poet, edited a Blake collection in 1888.
There was somebody called Tristan who jumped in for a second and then disappeared.
Oh, he's showing it.
Sam.
And like Tristan, I'm also interested in your writing process.
My writing process?
Yes.
For music or text?
Yeah, I think it's your writing. Apparently, it's Blake's settings. You said setting Blake's songs to music was hard, I believe. Did you leave the hardest ones to last?
Yes.
But why do you think they're particularly difficult?
Long. They're long. They're longer. I left the long ones, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
So basically, because they're longer, so makes them more difficult to set to music.
And some of them, I've written some that I'm not really satisfied with. I'm going to have to revisit them, and that's hard because once you get a tune in your ear, it's really hard to change it. But yeah, like the dear mother, the church is cold. That I'm still working on that.
Yeah.
One.
Okay, so Stephen Pritchard's got a question for you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on the whole business of Blake's musicianship, Stephen, because there's a really lovely line in the letter that he writes back to friends in London, and he's really excited about Felpham. And Haley as his patron, at this point, it's a very good relationship, and he's getting lots of work. And he says, he's given me 12 months work already. There's a great deal more in prospect. I call myself now independent. I can be poet, painter, and musician as the inspiration comes. So he lines it up as as one of the triads.
Yeah, I mean, late in the game, he visited someone. There was a patron who he used to visit, and the missus said that he used to sing Scottish songs to her and weep.
By the piano.
And weep, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't long ago. I mean, that's the thing, the Blakean vision, Ginsberg's vision of Blake, and saying, well, it's not that long ago. I mean, the difference between how many generations is it? I mean, my great grandfather was born not that long after Blake passed away, I think. It's not very long ago.
No.
Yeah, amazing. So, any further questions? Any raised hand? Any comment? Patty Smith has said that she saw Ginsberg's copy of Blake, and he had annotated every page. Did you ever see this book?
I don't recall it. No.
But you heard this story that his edition was completely annotated.
No, I never heard that before. I believe Patty though. I mean, she was a friend. Was a friend. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. John has a question. Are there any other musical settings of Blake which Stephen particularly rates?
I must confess, this is a very embarrassing question. I don't know. I've avoided them all.
But do you know any other setting by Blake other than Ed Sanders and Ginsberg? Are you familiar with any other, Perry, of course, but any other setting that
I'm afraid
comes
not.
to your mind?
I haven't gone there. I mean, that must be, that might be shocking, but I just haven't gone there. You know,
Yeah.
art song, the whole, anyway.
Yeah, apparently it's quite common that people who set Blake to music, they're not that familiarized with other settings. Apart from Ginsberg, I think they're all familiarized with Ginsberg settings. They heard of them at least.
Each one of us thinks that we, you know, he belongs to us. Maybe.
Yeah. So to write on the margins of a book, this is so great. So Eugene Onegin, like, yeah, the book. So I think that's it, right? So I think we don't have any other questions. So Steve, I would like to thank you. Oh, another raised hand. So it's Team Heath, the mayor himself.
I'd just like to step in and thank you both for a wonderful evening, to Steve and to Camilla for looking at Ginsberg and the settings and the bucking zebra of Ginsberg's diction, which is an extraordinary phrase. So we covered a great range from the Naropa Institute to the Staffordshire Mines. And as with Blake, it's always an extraordinary exploration. So our thanks to you both. And we look forward to seeing everyone at our next event in the month of April. And if you're not a member, do consider joining. What we do is to support Blake in all his manifestations. So until next month, our thanks to Steve and to Camilla. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, Camilla. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Ian. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.